You had a scoop today that I really wanted to talk about because it's kind of this ongoing question of what we're going to, it's important to this ongoing question of what we're actually going to learn about the Biden cover-up that you covered in book length with Original Sin. So we can put this story that you wrote up on the screen. This is F3. This is how Trump is now denying 9 former Biden aides executive privilege. And then what happened today, Alex, I'm actually just going to let you explain it because you know the players better. This story then turns into another story. It's people dropping out, not wanting to testify if there is no executive privilege, probably understandable if you're them. So tell us what you reported today on Axios.
Yeah, so today, Anthony Bernal, who is Jill Biden's top aide and also one of the most powerful people in the White House, abruptly dropped out of his interview, which was scheduled for tomorrow. And the chairman of the Oversight Committee, James Comer, essentially said, "Hey, this is because the dropping of executive privilege." Someone familiar with Bernal's sort of going back and forth the committee then said, it was just a scheduling issue. James Comer then said he was going to subpoena Anthony Bernal, and this is very quickly turning into a mess. Now, the reason why this is significant is because most presidents, as just sort of protocol as a way of protecting the executive branch, just usually do not waive executive privilege, even if their predecessors were from another party. Obama, protected executive privilege for George W. Bush. George W. Bush did it for Bill Clinton, on and on and on. Now, Joe Biden did not do this in very specific instance of the January 6th committee. And it was acknowledged that in the letter that Trump's White House sent waiving executive privilege to the former Biden aides was phrased very, very similarly to the letter that the Biden White House sent to former Trump aides about January 6th, which is basically, it's not in the national interest. These are extraordinary circumstances. And we are going to see, because at the moment, they basically sent this letter to all of the top Biden aides who had already agreed in principle to a voluntary interview. Interestingly, they did not send one of these letters to Dr. Kevin O'Connor, who is Joe Biden's personal physician, who did already refuse the voluntary interview, already was subpoenaed, and is now set to be deposed on July 9th.
Okay, so let's take a look at this clip of Neera Tanden. And Alex, I mean, some people know who Neera Tanden is. She's especially popular with the populist left. Obviously, I'm kidding. But let's roll S5 here, and you can tell us a little bit about what it means and what it portends for the future.
I just spoke with the House Oversight Committee, Majority and Minority Council. I answered every question, was pleased to discuss my public service, and it was a thorough process, and I'm glad I answered every question.
Was there an effort to disguise President Biden's condition?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so problem solved, Alex. Nothing surprising there from Neera Tanden this week, obviously, but is this what it's going to be like indefinitely from your sense? I mean, as you have sources, obviously, that you spoke with for Original Sin and for your reporting at Axios. Is your sense that this is basically how it's going to play out indefinitely into the future?
I really don't know, which is why I actually wrote the stories, because there has been some interesting moves that have made me feel they might actually uncover some new things that I was not able to get in my reporting with CNN's Jake Tapper about this story, in part because we don't have subpoena power. I mean, the fact that they are going to get the president's personal physician under oath, under subpoena, is interesting. The fact that Neera Tanden, while obviously was defensive, not just in public, but also in private, according to sources that were in the room, her opening statement was a little, was very carefully worded, in that she said that after of May of 2023, her interactions with the president were very limited. Now, if you read our book, while Joe Biden had lapses, had trouble remembering people's names years before that, his decline and the rate of it significantly increase according to our reporting starting in the summer of 2023. And so I did think it was interesting that she noted that in her opening statement that her interactions were much more limited after she stopped being staff secretary. And, it wasn't that she left the White House. She was the chief domestic policy advisor after that. And our reporting also shows that especially starting in late 2023, that the inner circle of the White House basically limited access to members of the cabinet, other senior members of the White House, to an extraordinary extent. And we even had one person said it was intentional, that it was to hide the extent of his decline from the broader apparatus of the White House.
And I've really seen a lot of chatter just concentrated on the right about the Autopen scandal, but Neera Tanden, I believe, is implicated in that, right, Alex?
Well, so Neera Tanden was staff secretary before she was domestic policy advisor. And staff secretary is one of those jobs that sounds honestly not very important, but is actually one of the most important people in the government and thus like in the United States. They essentially control all the paper flow in and out of the White House. Now, using an Autopen is not that unusual. Harry Truman started using it fairly frequently. But what has been pointed out, and this is an analysis that I haven't independently corroborated to be clear, but there is an analysis, and I'm working on that, but there is an analysis from the Conservative Heritage Foundation that suggests that Joe Biden started using the Autopen much more frequently beginning in 2023 and 2024. And if that's the case, some of that would go through, or if not some, all of it, depending on how it would work. Traditionally, all paper goes through the staff secretary's office, would go through. And so the staff secretary would certainly be part of it, which is, I think, why James Comer wanted to make sure that she was brought in, because she was staff secretary basically through all of 2022 and through the first 5 months of 2023.
When you said Harry Truman used the Autopen, I was picturing like a wind up. I'm trying to think of what it would have been like the 1940s. Like you have to wind it up and then it just goes.
It's a great question. I actually have no idea. And it's also weird because Joe Biden at one point, I do remember reporting the story in like spring of 2022. He literally had a national security aide, I think it was the Ukraine aid bill, fly from Washington, D.C. to Tokyo with the actual physical bill so he could physically sign it. So like he sometimes used it, sometimes didn't, but there are some interesting questions raised by, and it's not really in our book because no one mentioned it before, but I have been interested in some of the analysis of the increasingly frequent use of it in 2023 and 2024.
Well, I was going to say, actually, that anecdote about the bill being flown to Tokyo raises interesting questions about why, if the president made a point about that at one time, does that mean that he wasn't the one calling the shots at other times? I'm not saying that's the case at all, but it's an interesting point of comparison.